In 1833, America experienced a political revolution with the formation of the Whig Party. Ditching the powdered wigs that defined the 18th century American politics, the WHIG Whigs were proposed as a fresh, hip, and new party, one that would define the 19th century of American politics for years to come. Their brand of politics, in their minds, was different and would fundamentally change the way they were conducted in a nation that was slowly but surely becoming the world's biggest powerhouse. The catalyst for the formation of the Whig Party was the election of Andrew Jackson in 1829 as our nation's 7th president. Jackson, who grew up a feeble child in rural Tennessee and rose to become America's defining military figure in the War of 1812, particularly after his heroics in the Battle of New Orleans, was America's first post-Revolutionary War celebrity president. It is largely due to Andrew Jackson that the United States took possession of Alabama, Florida, and Georgia, which led to American expansion into the greater frontier later that century. Jackson, who had also served in both houses of Congress before running for president, governed like he fought, uncompromising and unrelenting. The people loved him, just as they loved people like Samuel Adams and George Washington, who did the same. Americans have always loved war heroes. It's in our DNA and has been ever since the birth of our nation. Jackson was no exception to that. The first true populist to run for elected office, Jackson captured the hearts and minds of the growing nation, particularly those of working class and rural Americans, of which he was one. Jackson first ran for president in 1824 against John Quincy Adams, Henry Clay, and William H. Crawford. The race initially too close to call, the House of Representatives invoked the 12th Amendment, which gave them the power to decide the next commander-in-chief. In one of the most stunning political maneuvers in American history, Clay, who was also the Speaker of the House, mind you, suddenly dropped out, threw his weight behind Adams, and convinced the chamber of Congress that he presided over to swing votes into Adams's favor. He won, and Clay was anointed as his Secretary of State. Dubbing this a quote-unquote corrupt bargain, Jackson and his grassroots movement were enraged. They rightly felt gypped, like their power had been taken out of their hands and into the hands of Washington bureaucrats. John Quincy Adams, much like many children of great men, was a mediocre and unimpressive president and person. Jackson and his supporters leveraged this throughout Adams' disastrous 4-year term, and later came back in 1828 to win by a landslide. His movement, Jacksonianism, became the go-forward platform for what would be known as the Democratic Party. This all begs a question: what was exactly so threatening about Andrew Jackson? Throughout history, we see parallels, of course. Andrew Jackson was no different than all other populist presidents in American history, such as Theodore Roosevelt, Richard Nixon, and Donald Trump. All of them were remarkably popular with their voters, the people who, in theory, decide the presidency. However, all of them have also faced remarkable opposition from America's ruling class. Our aristocracy, then and now, views this as a virus, a cancer that must be removed. For example, Andrew Jackson was a protectionist and fought for American workers on issues like tariffs. He was against deficit spending to fund big government, becoming the only president in our entire history to pay off our national debt. He hated the Federal Reserve, the central banking system developed by power-mad Alexander Hamilton during America's founding. If you're looking for why woke Broadway picked him as their founding father of choice, look no further than that. The established order of American politics hated all of these things, but unfortunately they had a problem. They were unpopular. The mandate election of Jackson over their sacred cow, John Quincy Adams, had proved that. They were losing steam, and fast. Something radical had to be done, something that had never before been seen. Enter the Whig Party. The Whigs, a clever name given the history of the term, were the party of the elite. Formed by Adams, Clay, and several others, the Whigs began to gain steam, later putting 4 presidents, William Henry Harrison, John Tyler, Zachary Taylor, and Millard Fillmore, into office. But interestingly enough, the Whigs at the end of it all didn't have any cohesion. They were an odd mix of people, those who, when looked at from afar, had nothing in common in terms of policy. But the one thing they did have in common was enough, for the time being, to work in their favor. They all, to a person, hated Andrew Jackson. After Jackson's second term ended in 1836, the Whigs went on a tear, leveraging anti-Jacksonian sentiment, which had been building, from their large financial and state backers to ram through their agenda onto the American people. That agenda was very simple. Whatever Andrew Jackson did, they chose the opposite. And it worked for a while. From 1836 to 1854, their political dominance remained nearly unimpeded, building strongholds in nearly every aspect of American life. But then something began to happen. As the Whigs seized power in American politics, the country began to sink further and further into division, particularly over the issue of slavery. It was here that the rubber finally met the road for the Whigs, particularly after the passing of the Kansas-Nebraska Act in the 1850s. The Whigs, completely at odds internally over slavery, could no longer blame the boogeyman of Andrew Jackson as to what to tell their voters on which way they wanted the country to go on its most pivotal issue. As soon as any matter of substance entered the picture, they disintegrated. After the passing of the act, in which Kansas became a slave state and Nebraska a free one, their party imploded, with some anti-slave Whigs, including Abraham Lincoln, Rutherford B. Hayes, Chester Arthur, and Benjamin Harrison, forming the Republican Party to oppose the Democrats. All of them became future presidents in the Republican dominance of the late 1800s. The Whigs, for their part, coming off an unbelievable 20-year run, were gone in an instant. There has been much historical analysis made as to why the demise of the Whig Party happened, and I won't bore you with the details. The bottom line with the Whigs, the reason why this element of American history is so important to analyze, is the following. When your ideas are bad, or more importantly, if you have none at all, you have nothing. People don't like to follow those who don't know what they stand for, who don't have any values, who tell people what to do without any reasoning behind it. People won't tolerate this because they know it leads to destruction. History has taught us this lesson over and over again, whether it was Moses leading the Israelites out of Egypt or the Battle of Little Bighorn. So given all of this, it is incredibly interesting to compare what happened with the Whigs to what is happening with the party they were, ironically enough, so keen on destroying, the modern Democratic Party. When you look back at America over the past 20 years, Democratic politics is eerily similar. They ran not on any ideas like Bill Clinton wisely did in the 90s. They simply ran on not being George Bush. Now disenfranchised by their own voters, they put together a coalition of diversified elites across all demographics and sectors of industry. Instead of desiring a touch point with their voters, they consolidated to places of quote-unquote higher society, like New York, Silicon Valley, and Washington, D.C. Ever since the re-election of Donald Trump, we've seen a precipitous decline in the standing of the Democratic Party. In a bombshell CNN poll, for example, only 29% have a favorable rating of the party. In an NBC News poll, that number sinks even lower to 27%. Both are historic lows in the history of each poll, which overwhelmingly, by the way, sways left due to their own bias, much like Fox News does with the conservative poll. This leads us to a question, one that Democrats have never answered since Donald Trump toppled them last November. What exactly binds the Democratic Party together? Is it policies on trade, for example? Is it an appeal to voters of certain ethnicities and races? Is it an emphasis on education or putting women in STEM or making sure there are enough Filipino non-binary people in oil and gas manufacturing? It doesn't seem obvious to anyone that this is the case. The only thing that Democrats have to cling to, the only thing that is keeping them together over their 20 years of dominance over every aspect of American culture and life, has been whittled down to one choke point: their collective hatred of Donald Trump. There is nothing unifying today about the Democratic Party, other than the big bad orange man they just cannot seem to rid themselves of. They're all on the same page there. He's a threat to democracy, they say. There's no mandate. We have to stop him, raid his home, put him in prison, kill him, crucify him. And this line of attack worked for a while. But unfortunately for the Democrats, as with the Whigs, it is now falling on deaf ears. Americans move on from presidents, no matter how seismic people like Andrew Jackson and Donald Trump were and are. Rather, it is the ideas that remain, the ideas that carry onward to the generations. A movement built on good ideas can last for millennia. A movement built on a singular person and bad ideas is a ticking time bomb. There has been much talk in recent months about the viability of the Democratic Party going forward. Many people are coming to the same conclusion that I have come to. The Democratic Party, if it doesn't undergo a severe sense of self-reflection, is currently tripping the wire on that ticking time bomb. At this rate, it doesn't have much time left. They have no leadership, no message, no go-forward plan, no anything. It's a grim sight to see, and one the Democrats seem ever keen on keeping not so secretive. And the evidence for this lies primarily on two fronts. In Donald Trump's quasi-State of the Union address given earlier this month, he smartly took the 80 side of every 80-20 issue, even wearing a purple tie to boot. And some of these issues included the following. Teenage girls who get brutally murdered and sexually assaulted by illegal immigrants is a bad thing. It's unethical to have a young woman get brain damage and partially paralyzed by getting a volleyball spiked in her face by a man cosplaying as a woman. Little boys who are fighting brain cancer should be honored as heroes. Donald Trump, showing his political genius, gave the Democrats every inch of rope he could to pull themselves up by. Instead, they foolishly and pridefully chose to hang themselves with it, their lone defense being a sad elderly man waving his cane at the clouds, not unlike Homer Simpson's father telling his unruly grandson Bart to get off of his lawn. But it is the second front that is far more damaging. All of their ideas, their so-called policy stances they take, are either or both one of two things: tremendously scatterbrained and unpopular. When Charlie Kirk and Gavin Newsom appeared on a podcast together, the governor of the most liberal state in the country largely agreed with Kirk, one of Trump's most avid defenders, on several conservative talking points. At a recent teachers union protest against the closing of the Department of Education, their rallying cry was, quote, "Your children belong to us." Their only reliable voter base is young single white women, flying directly in the face of the party who supposedly stands for diversity, equity, and inclusion. They hired David Hogg, a belligerent and radical anti-Second Amendment advocate, to lead their party into the future. At that same convention, they had to stop a panel because there wasn't enough non-binary representation. Their lone rising star is Jasmine Crockett, who, while no doubt is attractive, entertaining, fun, and hilarious, just said with a straight face on The Breakfast Club that the Democrats are quote-unquote effectively countering Trump. This is a lie, and she and everyone else knows it. Many conservatives are celebrating this mass extinction event, or really anyone with a cohesive sense of values. But I would argue caution as we proceed forward. On one hand, it is a good thing that the Democratic Party is imploding. Their policies, particularly in the past 20 years, have done nothing but cause cultural division, economic impoverishment, and societal decay. They're certainly not the Democratic Party of Andrew Jackson. They're Jacobins, willing to do anything and everything within their power to destroy our culture, country, and values. Which is exactly why we should be cautious about how we proceed. Because of this version of the Democratic Party, these Jacobins somehow find their way back into elected office, a much larger possibility than most think, by the way. They will not forget, just as the MAGA movement didn't. If they get back into power, they won't hold back. They will not temper their arguments. They will do what these movements always do: burn everything to the ground and salt the earth behind them. Bad ideas cannot perpetuate themselves over time. That is the lesson of the Whigs, the Democrats, and so many other hollow and rotten institutions today's show will be exposing and talking about. People, as it turns out, can indeed smell bullshit a mile away. But like all rotten things, they must be promptly dealt with and taken care of. Their infection has a way of spreading. As pridefully self-anointed guardians of the new majority, we must be ever careful to steward this responsibility properly.